Okay, so this evening we are going to do a circuit at Edwards Air Force Base with the A320, really to play with the autopilot to see if it works on just using vectors to, give it directions and speeds and see how it behaves. So hopefully it should be fairly straightforward. So I've just launched the simulator. We're sat here. If I press end key, you can see what's on the aircraft. I can pan around with the joystick. As with the mouse. I'm sat here on the tarmac. I haven't configured anything yet, so it's cold on the runway. Not cold, but it's already up and running. But I haven't configured anything. So the first thing we're going to do, so we don't have a mad panic when we're in the air, is coming to the radio navigation page of the MCDU. It's worth pointing out the MCDU is wildly inaccurate from the real Airbus one, but we're going to put in 110.1 for the ILS and 226 for the course, because we're on runway 23 at Edwards, which is actual direction is 226 degrees. So this will help once we switch the... It's worth pointing this out actually. This display is controlled by this knob. If you put it into ILS mode, it will make much more sense when we're in the air. It will show what we're doing. In terms of the ILS beam, which is an invisible beam from the runway at 3 degrees out across the surrounding scenery. So, the way the autopilot works on an Airbus is you have various different modes that the chosen options. If we had a flight plan programmed in, this would be the correct options for it. You can see if you hold the mouse above the top half of any of these, it will say engage managed speed mode or engage selected airspeed mode. You've got engage managed heading and selected heading. The same is true for the altitude. Engage managed altitude, engage selected altitude. If you've got a fully programmed flight plan, you would have predetermined speeds, headings and altitudes as part of the flight plan. So that's what managed refers to. So the aircraft can pretty much fly the entire flight plan without any interference from the pilot. If obviously you're still going to watch what it's up to, but it can do it all on its own. Selected means we're going to choose the values along the way. So I'm going to click the down arrow on the speed, and I'm going to pre-select by rolling the mouse wheel at 220 knots. Heading, I'm going to put it into selected heading mode. Notice the dot goes away. So if I press the top half to go to managed mode, you get a dot that shows up. The dot goes away when it's in selected mode. So 225 degrees is almost the same as the runway. The runway is 226. So you can use the mouse wheel to spin the knob round. Altitude. So let's have a look. Sat on the ground here at Edwards Air Force Base, we are already at 2,200 feet. So if we go and look on the altitude, so that's going to be 2,500 feet basically above the ground. We will go for selected altitude mode instead of plan. Okay. We can also play around with the vertical speed. So you can choose the rate you want to get to that altitude at. So if I put 1,000 feet a minute, or even 2,000 feet a minute, a little aircraft like this with powerful engines will easily be able to maintain 2,000 feet a minute at low altitudes. Or it should be able to, I should say. So we should be good to go. If you're wondering what this number is here, it's the barometric pressure that will affect your height readout. So if you were to change it, you will see the altitude changing. 2992 is the standard. Okay? So it'll probably say here, set barometric pressure back to standard. Enable the selection. So that is doing essentially the same thing. Standard is 2992. You can actually choose the if it's going to let me. Yeah. Will it let me choose that one? There you go, hecto. It's not going to let me choose it, so that's probably a fault in the... Oh no, it's done it, yeah. You just have to be in the correct mode. You can either have it in hectopascals or HPA, I forget what it stands for. But it's two different measurement systems for the same thing, basically. So you're basically setting the barometric pressure. When you get the METARS data with the weather data from a weather station, they will tell you for a given airport what the barometric pressure should be to set the ground level, so you don't get any nasty surprises in terms of your reported altitude. Anyway, I think we're good to go. So I'm going to accelerate off down the runway. Oh, before I do that, I need to set the flaps to 2. So the flaps have 4 settings on an Airbus. You can see them here. So 1, 2, 3, 4. It's interesting. So if we go back to 1 plus F, let's move the flaps to there. If we recall the flaps completely, I'm doing this with a joystick control, by the way. So that's interesting. In this simulator, that is not doing anything. It's not letting me move it either. But you can control the flaps because I'm able to do it here. And you can see you get the what you've selected, and then it takes the flaps a few seconds to move to what you've selected. So typically for takeoff you'll be looking for flaps 2. It's a shame that you can't control them directly in the cockpit. Okay, so we'll open the engines up. So I've gone to full throttle, and you can see the throttle is in manual mode and it's gone to toga. I'm going to release the wheel brakes. Toga means take off, go around. So we're in manual throttle mode. Take off, go around power setting. Let's see, just out of interest, once I come off the runway, I will rotate at about 160 knots, by the way. We'll see when we come off the runway. Rotate, and we're looking for gear up, pull the nose up to 15 degrees. Automatic throttle has kicked in,
Airbus A320,
which is not realistic. It shouldn't come on its own. We are now going to reduce the throttle slightly. You can see the mode has changed here, and now I've pulled it back to a certain amount. It's saying speed. What this means is that this little cutout on the throttle is on this marker, and that means you can leave the throttle on that setting, and the automatic throttle, which kicked in as soon as we came off the ground, is going to follow this setting. Now that is not the same as the autopilot, that's the autopilot. This is the automatic throttle.
Airbus A320, did you
So now I can go for autopilot. I switched it on. So it's basically going the same direction we were going. And it's actually started to reduce altitude automatically, because it knows we're above 5,000 feet. Actually, it's holding altitude. So we need to tell it the rate we want to go down at. It's also complaining we're going too fast. That's because we didn't raise the flaps. It's not in a dangerous situation, but I will raise the flaps out of the way.
Did you copy?
So it just shows how powerful these aircraft are, that you can get yourself into difficult situations very quickly. That was purely because I didn't reduce the speed quickly enough and didn't raise the flaps. I let it accelerate off the runway at full throttle. So we are now coming back down to 5,000 feet, and you should see, there's the marker, showing what we have selected on the autopilot. And we are descending.
Please acknowledge.
Because it's already nearly at 5,000 feet, the vertical speed has disappeared. So the aircraft is already trimming itself ready to level out at 5,000. And 220 knots. So if we were to go look outside, we can see ourselves just gently going along. So now we're going to begin a left turn. We're at 226 degrees at the moment, so we're going to go for 44 degrees, which would be the reciprocal. So let's just rewind this knob round to 44, way too far. When you change dials in Microsoft Flight Simulator for all the versions ever, it seems, the rate of change accelerates the more you continue doing it. So it's very easy to over control. So you can see the compass direction changing. If we look outside, we can see the plane is turning. See the gear up. We pulled the flaps up. So if we go look outside, gently turning. There's maybe quite a long climax over there. So we are going to fly back down the opposite side of the airbase. En route we can have a look at some of the other systems. It's a shame that in the stock Airbus that comes with Flight Simulator 2020, none of these buttons work. They all show us, or some of them do, but yeah, it's a shame, because if you wanted to do like a cold and dark start of the aircraft, some of them are really useful to see what the power situation is with batteries and things like that. It's like many of these don't work, which is a shame as well. These do. This is essentially that's the flight control systems. You've got the GPWS there. You've got the being able to route power through the APU, the auxiliary power unit. So you've got batteries here, APU. It has to be said, it's much easier to start an Airbus than it is a Boeing. These should work. Oh no, they've even got rid of the fact here. You can't have engine fires, which is a shame. So you can't practice that. That's the inertial navigation system, and that's all inoperative as well. So those are the gyros that kick off when you're on the ground. It takes about 7 or 8 minutes usually when you're sat on the tarmac for it all to stabilise. And that's what gives you such accurate information about where you are. So this wouldn't come on typically until the inertial guidance is all stabilised. And after switching the inertial guidance on, you would get a status readout down here saying how many minutes until it's ready to go. So where are we in terms of the airbase? Let's have a look. So we're just coming back past again. So it's out there. So we're doing 220 knots, 44 degrees, 5,000 feet. We can see on the HUD here if we have any wind. So that's the direction of the wind. That's relative to the way we're pointing, and that's the speed of the wind. So we're being pushed, you can see the base here on this map, we're being pushed this way at 4 knots. So we're being pushed further away. So if we did exactly the same turn we did earlier, turning back, we will be off to the left slightly. If you were doing ready reckoning type operations with the aircraft, you have a chronometer over here, and again it's inoperative. That's a shame, because it's actually quite useful. If you can, yeah, none of the timers work. Oh, that's a shame. I wonder if the terrain radar works. Yes, it does. It shouldn't be lit up like that though. Okay, it's a very simplified view. It should be showing relative to the aircraft where any outcrops are. So it should be mostly dark with some light areas. on any raised, like this little bit of a hill here should just show as a small blob. So that doesn't work properly either. Interestingly, the Airbus, I'm not sure if it's going to be on here. Yeah, here it is. You've got rain radar and things like that. And then, of course, it's all going to be inoperative. If you've got X-Plane and the Zebo mod for it, it all works. So you've got the nav radios and the VHF radios for communication here. I think, yes, this works. What else have we got we can have a play with? Obviously there's the MCDU, or the FMC as they call it in a Boeing, the flight management computer. These knobs control what's on the various displays. These are for the brightness of the displays. Likewise, these knobs are for the floodlights, which obviously you won't see them in the daytime.
1,500.
So how are we doing in terms of where the airbase is? Let's go and have a look outside. It's kind of cheating. We'll get to this little hilltop and then we'll do our U-turn and go back towards Edwards. So move back forwards. So we've already tuned the ILS in, remember. So if we go and change this now to ILS mode, you'll see, yeah, it's showing where we are in relation to the beam. So we are above the beam, and we're about to become below the beam. So that's good. We'll wait until we're below the beam, because that means we can turn on the approach mode on the ILS. As long as you're below the beam and you're coming up to meet it, the approach mode should capture the beam and nose down and take us straight into the runway. So we are still doing the same speed we were doing earlier. We'll wait until we are below the beam before we make our turn. Give it a few seconds after that just to make sure. And we'll begin our turn. So we're going to do the same as we did earlier, but we're going to go back to 226 degrees. Whoa. Went too far, so I'd gone beyond the reciprocal and the plane wanted to turn the opposite direction to make the corner. So here we go, we're going around the corner again. We could start, I'll wait with slowing down until we're already out of the turn. Because I want to try and make sure the turn radius is pretty similar than the previous turn, which we did at 220 knots, remember. But if you remember, there's a side wind, although the whole time we've been coming downwind, there was a side wind which will have pushed us off the centre line over time. So let's have a look. So there's the marker on the ILS for the beam in relation to us, so it's above us. We can actually help that if I put 4,000 feet on here. So now let's see if this will go on its own. I think I may have to click it. There you go, descent mode. So it's going to make its own way down to 4,000 feet, and there it goes. It's going to do it at the speed it wants to do it. Now you can see now we've just crossed the beam, which is interesting. Let's get the speed down to 160 now. Let's get the flaps down.
Overspeed.
Yeah, we get an overspeed warning because we've just crossed into the region where the flaps are going to warn us about the speed we're doing. Get the gear down. And we can put on approach mode because we're quite a long way out. And you can see we're off to the right of the ILS beam at the moment. So what the aircraft is going to do is put itself on an intercept course to intercept the beam. So if we were to go full flaps now, so you can see the flaps are on full, The only reason I'm actually going to full flaps is so we can see where we're going, because with the flaps full down, the nose will come down as well. So you can see there's the runway. So we are flying an intercept course, and then the autopilot will turn us towards the runway. You don't want to get too slow in an Airbus, because if you get towards a warning slow speed, the auto throttle will accelerate you to avoid you stalling the aircraft. So you actually need to fly the aircraft into the runway, if that makes any sense at all. So if we sit up in our seat here, we can watch the aircraft fly itself back in. So I've not flown the aircraft at all, apart from steering it down the runway. We really have not done anything. It's coming back all on its own. 160 knots. It's picked up the ILS. You can see the altitude is slowly dropping off. You can see here the vertical ILS marker is dead center, because that's the autopilot following it. This line, our path, our track relative to the runway is dead on, so we're on the center line of the runway. It's all looking good. It's a shame actually on the standard version of the A320 that you get with Flight Simulator. If I go and change the mode of the displays, they both change. They shouldn't. They should be independent of each other, which means you could have the map on one side and the ILS on the other, which is really useful. So what we're going to do as I come over the runway, I know because I've tried this before, this will fly itself into the runway hard. So I am going to, when we get to about 30 feet, I'm going to start pulling the nose up and cut the engines at the same time as each other. So I might come off the auto throttle now. So I'm just holding the engines at an amount that is holding the speed, and I'm letting it fly itself down.
300.
So what you would typically do, I'm going to come off of approach mode as well, and we've got a little way left.
200.
So I've just disabled the autopilot. So we can watch the ILS if we want.
60. 50.
Cutting the engines.
40. 30. 20. Retard. 5.
Misjudged that slightly, but we're down. And wheel brakes. So yeah, it was fairly straightforward. The Airbus more or less flies itself. It's probably more fun to fly things manually, but you saw there we were able to do a nice easy circuit, fly around, and came straight back in. No kind of dramas at all really. We were a bit fast on the climb out, but it wasn't a massive problem. We're going to raise the flaps, roll back into the... I'm not going to bother recording rolling back. Plane, switch the engines back on, but I'll stop this here.